Listener wants to know, doesn't the Bible say that interracial marriage is wrong in Deuteronomy 7, verses 3 and 4? So I thought we would read that passage and then comment on it to verify or not whether this questioner is correct. So I'll just read. In fact, as I was reading the passage, I thought, well, we probably should continue reading past verse 4 because I think verses 5 and 6 really do clarify what this passage is about. Just to set it up, this is part of God's instruction to Israel when they come into their promised land that he's leading them to.
What's the verse again?
It's Deuteronomy chapter 7.
All right, I'm going to read along with you. Just follow along.
All right.
Not that I don't trust you, but I just want to be able to look at it.
You don't have to.
That's old school. Let's all doubt what he's saying.
Let's pull out our Bibles.
Pull out our
I'll pull out our Bibles.
Our translation.
Okay.
Let's doubt
It's old school, except
Yes.
all
I'm
of
doing
us.
it too.
All of us are on smartphones.
So basically, the setup to the verse where I'm going to start is he's telling the Israelites, when you come into this land, and I'm gonna drive out the people in front of you. We're gonna move into this place, and you're gonna sort of be in charge. And he says, here's some things that I want you to do. And in verse 3, one of those things he says is, do not intermarry with them, and he's talking about the nations that they had come in conflict with. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. Verse 5 says, this is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. So, in the midst of this command to not intermarry with these other nations, immediately he gives his reasons for that. And his reasons are not racial in nature.
No, that's right.
That's not
right.
even close. They're spiritual in nature.
Yeah. And I think the closest command that you might find or instruction that you might find in the New Testament is closer to Paul talking about being unequally yoked, or for believers to when they are in the place of pursuing a spouse, to pursue a spouse of the same faith that has
That's
the
right.
same values in that sense. And
Yeah, I was going to say that the Scripture as a whole never condemns interracial marriage, but it constantly condemns marriage across faith lines.
Interfaith.
That's the thing that it constantly says, and it's repeated in the New Testament. Never is it explicitly about race.
I will say, though, it does specifically mention the Hittites and the Girgashites. So maybe if you're planning on marrying a Girgashite, you need to watch out.
Good luck finding one. They may be on Tinder. I don't know.
Maybe there's some
You're going to have to go to finding your DNA to find out. You might be marrying a Girgashite.
I might be married to a Girgashite. I want to see some Def Comedy Jam about the difference between the Hittites when they do something and the Girgashites when they do something. That might be some interesting humor right there, but nobody would get it at all.
I'll also say, it just hit me in reading this and listening to you guys as well talk about that he's not condemning racial, but he's condemning them for religious purity, or saying don't marry across racial lines. It just hit me that the guy who is saying this out loud for God is Moses.
Yes.
And Moses is married across racial lines.
I was going to make that point. I was reading today in my discipleship, which we all are right now, in our discipleship reading, I read the genealogy of Jesus.
Yes.
And in Jesus' genealogy, it contains people of other races as well. And so never is that called out.
No.
In fact, it's accepted as a normal thing. So
but for Moses in particular, just to show that, we had this conversation on Sunday, that it wasn't just that race in the sense that we think of race is a modern invention, but there's always been prejudice, and there's always been this feeling of this desire to separate. That happens with Moses when he takes a wife who is from in what would have been at that time an African kind of nation. And the Israelites and the leaders, they're not happy specifically that he married someone from another nation.
when God calls him to use him, the only thing God is upset with Moses and his wife about is they haven't practiced the covenant by circumcising their children.
Yes, it's
so
a religious thing.
He gets really upset with them about the religious part. He didn't say anything about the intermarriage,
Right.
the what we would call racial intermarriage, but he's
Right.
pretty upset. Sends an angel after him.
Yep.
Yes.
Another thing that came to my mind as I was thinking about this issue, and I'm certainly not saying that this is what the question asker means. I do not mean this at all. But I can tell you that when I was being raised in the South, in a culture that had lots of racist tendencies, this verse was used to condemn that kind of thing. But what I found pretty disingenuous and contradictory, in my opinion, about the way it was used was I knew people in my family, in my church family growing up, who would absolutely use this verse to condemn marriage between a black and a white person.
Right.
But
Of the same faith.
of the same faith, of course, but never seemed to have quite the same issue with people of other races. In other words, there were some white people I knew that were part of our church that were married to Asian
Yeah,
people.
that didn't seem to be a problem.
And that didn't seem to be a problem. And same thing with Latino married to a white person. That didn't seem to be a problem. But as soon as, a girl in the youth group had an interest in a black boy or whatever, that was a problem somehow. And I thought, well, why aren't we being consistent? That always troubled me as a kid. I said, I don't think we're being consistent on this. And I never got a really good answer to why that was. And
You know why?
probably because there
Because
wasn't.
there's no really good answer to that.
There wasn't an answer to that. So, yeah.
That's one of those, hey, you just listen. You'll understand one day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will say that a minister that had a great impact in my life growing up once clarified this issue for me. I heard him say it. He said it very plainly in a church that really didn't take well to it. And he said, and he was, of course, a white guy. He said, I would rather my daughter marry a black Christian than a white non-Christian.
Right.
And I will always stand on that. And I respected him for that statement.
Well,
And in those same churches growing up, I saw many people who were faithful Christians who were only dating people who were not Christian, and it's almost like it was evangelistic dating.
Oh, yeah.
That they were going to get them in church.
Yeah.
Now, it very seldom worked.
Right.
They got in church
It worked
long
the other
enough
way,
to get the preacher to marry them.
Yes.
And then that was the end of it. But nobody had seemed to have a problem with that, though that is clearly forbidden, Old Testament and New Testament.
And New Testament. And that's something I've had talks with couples who wind up in my office, and they always seem to be shocked when I bring the issue up of, there's a conflict of faith here, and it's going to be a problem. That never seemed to enter into the conversation for some reason.
and maybe we should take a moment to talk about that, because I do think that equally is pretty controversial for people.
Oh, yeah.
To even think of that interfaith marriage is something that is spoken against in even the New Testament scriptures that we just talked about. Paul says, "Do not be unequally yoked." Why is that important? Why is this something that we should be concerned about? The interracial thing, not a thing to be concerned about. This, we should be concerned about. Why?
Yeah.
But, I mean, if you're going to follow Jesus, and you're going to really follow Jesus, it is the driving force of your life. And Jesus makes clear it will separate you from other people who don't want to follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. And the next commitment in order, in my opinion, and what the Bible seems to say, I make a commitment to the Lord, I will follow him. The next commitment I make, that I stand in front of God and other people and say, is to the person I marry. Yeah. I pledge myself to them.
Yeah.
And if they are pulling on a different rope than I am, it's going to make our marriage really, really, really tough.
Sure.
And I have enough experience to tell you, I know 100% it does.
Yeah,
People
it does.
think it won't. It always becomes a problem.
And you just reminded me, Ed, I maybe you guys can help me remember when this was. We did a series maybe a couple years ago now called Unhappily Married. I remember that?
Yeah.
I believe that was the series where I taught on this very issue. I taught a message that dealt with this issue of, why is it important to marry someone who is on the same page with you spiritually? But then I also spoke, and that's why I bring this up. I also spoke to people in our congregation who found themselves in an unequally yoked marriage at the moment. And of course, the teaching of Scripture and practical advice would say, stay where you are.
Stay.
Yeah.
Stay where you are. That it is not an unforgivable sin to marry outside of your faith. However, you now have some unique challenges and some unique situations that you're going to have to think through and deal with if you're going to maintain and follow Jesus the way that you probably should. And so anyway, I just make reference to that. I can't remember the exact date on that. We can go back and
It's been a long time.
it's been a while. So, but you can go back in our archives and find that. It's called Unhappily Married.
Maybe.
I think.
Maybe.
I don't think it was that long
No,
ago.
I don't think it was that
I think
long
it's
ago. I
somewhere.
remember it.
It's on the YouTubes.
I think I think it goes to be important to talk about what we even mean by being a Christian and what you think that means, because I think in these conversations, and these are the conversations at least I've had with, once again, talking around here, most of the time I would talk to people who are younger and not married at this point, and talking with them, whether my age and not married or teenagers and not married, and they're thinking about it. And the common idea is, well, I can believe what I want to believe and they can believe what they want to believe. And that probably is actually true. If it's just something that I'm going to think, like I believe Jesus existed, well, then someone else not believing it doesn't really change what I'm going to think about something actually happening or not. Now, it is possible that this person, if they are very antagonistic towards faith, they may change my thought if they continue to attack me and kind of berate me about it. But I'm assuming that if you're marrying this person, they love you, and that's not their main goal is to attack you and berate you. But if you see following Jesus as something that affects my practical day-to-day life and the decisions that I make and the things that I prioritize and the way that I interact in relationships, and I interact with my money, and I interact with my sex life, and I interact with all these different things, those are pretty critical marriage issues. When you talk about things that affect divorce, sex, finances, communication, priorities, those are huge issues within divorce rates and things among that nature. And Christians believe what I think about Jesus and what he says for me to do supersedes anything else. It's going to affect that. In my favorite book, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church.
Here we go.
You should check out. I remember one of the key issues, which I hadn't thought too much about, was talking about those passages that are written in these early church fathers write too as well, that you just don't think about that because women had no rights, particularly if you notice most of those are written to single women in these marriages. He says, you're going to be in a marriage with your husband who may not let you go visit the widows and the orphans, which, funny enough for many of us who go, well, you can be a Christian and never visit the widows and the orphans. They didn't think so.
They didn't think that was true.
They didn't think so. They thought, well, you can't, it doesn't matter what you believe up here. You're not living it out there. And he says, you also, because the sexual codes were different. For a woman to be able to, her husband could make her do whatever he wanted sexually. Or at that day, abortions were incredibly common. And so for a wife to be able to say, no, I value this infant's life, there was nothing she could do about it. And they would talk about it was making it practically miserable for her existence that these beliefs. Now, luckily, most of those things in our day, but I think for us to take Jesus seriously and to assume that someone of a different faith is going to value the same things we will, or if they do, maybe we do have the same faith. Maybe the things I value aren't the things Jesus does, because we don't believe that Jesus and someone who doesn't follow Jesus are going to have the same values.
It's the reason why we encourage, and I've always encouraged couples when you're considering marriage is to do some type of premarital counseling before you head into it, because if we really take oneness seriously, and that's what marriage is a one flesh, the Bible talks about, the two becoming one. All of those things that you listed, Nathan, that can often put us at odds. I'm not saying we agree on everything. We just, there are places where we work together. But as a general life direction of where we're going, that needs to be talked about. It needs to be figured out before we set out on this path, or else we are trying to go down two different paths.
We at least need to know we're both walking the same direction, because the truth is, having been married coming up on 41 years, even though you have the same direction, along the way you find out, oh, we had different thoughts about that.
Exactly.
But because we both had a common truth source,
Yes.
we were able to eventually get to the same place because we were all working off the same map. But when we're not even walking on the same path, I can't imagine how that. And I know, again, practically, I haven't seen it go very well. That's right. Not with. I mean, I've seen people survive in it, but it is painful.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's painful.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So, so to be a quick answer to that original question, no, the Bible has nothing. There's nothing wrong in the scriptures with interracial dating.
Well,
Or
again,
interracial marriage.
yeah.
Interracial
I don't know
marriage.
why it hadn't hit me until we were just sitting here thinking about it. But the fact that the guy who is saying the words is interracially married
interracially
should
married.
be a clue to you
Should be.
that is not what that means.
That wasn't the intent of that passage. So, point to something else, but at least the passage you brought up in your question certainly is not what that's about.